Ethan Rowe stood motionless in the courtroom, his calm eyes hiding a storm no one could see, until the word guilty shattered the silence and something inside him finally broke. The courtroom of Crestwood County buzzed with tension that morning. Every seat was taken, every camera focused, every breath held tight. The trial of Ethan Rowe had captured the town's imagination for months, and now it was finally coming to an end. He sat quietly at the defense table, dressed neatly in a gray suit that hung slightly loose on his frame, his face pale but calm. To an outsider, he looked like a man waiting for a business meeting to start, not a verdict that could end his life as he knew it. Ethan had once been a respected employee at Grayson Logistics, a large warehouse company that employed half the town. That changed one cold November night when the company's main facility burned to the ground. 2 workers who were inside late after hours never made it out. The fire spread fast, leaving behind nothing but blackened metal, melted machinery, and grief. The next day, investigators discovered something that changed everything: a gasoline canister with Ethan's fingerprints on it. At first, people refused to believe it. Ethan was the quiet type, the kind who brought donuts to work and helped his elderly neighbor shovel snow. He wasn't violent. He wasn't angry. But as the weeks passed, more pieces of evidence surfaced. Security footage showing his car near the site that night, suspicious messages on his phone hinting at a dispute with his boss, and a missing key card that matched his access code. By the time the trial began, the town's sympathy had turned into suspicion. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was thick with unease. The prosecution painted Ethan as a man pushed over the edge by jealousy and resentment. They said he set the fire to destroy evidence of his poor performance and to get revenge for being passed over for a promotion. The defense fought back, insisting that the evidence was planted and that Ethan had been home asleep when the fire started. But the jury didn't seem convinced. Their faces were hard to read, but their silence spoke volumes. Ethan sat through every testimony without emotion. He never raised his voice, never showed anger. The journalists called him the calm arsonist, a nickname that spread quickly online. Even as his own lawyer whispered urgent words beside him, he barely nodded. The only time he seemed alive was when he looked at the jury, his gaze steady, cold, and unblinking. It was as if he wanted to see the exact moment they decided his fate. The judge entered, his robe trailing softly across the floor, and the crowd fell silent. A faint hum from the fluorescent lights filled the space. Ethan's mother, seated in the second row, clutched a rosary so tightly that the beads left marks on her fingers. The foreman of the jury stood, holding the slip of paper that would determine everything. As the verdict was about to be read, a faint creak echoed from somewhere in the back of the room. It was just a chair shifting, but it made several people flinch. Everyone knew that after months of suspense, something final was coming. The air was heavy, charged with a strange electricity that made every movement feel exaggerated. Ethan sat perfectly still, his hands clasped, his eyes on the floor. No one could tell if he was ready or already broken. When the foreman opened his mouth, time seemed to stop. The courtroom, the whispers, the flashing cameras, everything faded into silence. In that breathless moment before the words came, even the walls seemed to listen. The air in the courtroom thickened as the foreman unfolded the slip of paper. Every sound seemed magnified, the rustle of fabric, the faint buzz of the ceiling lights, the steady tick of the courtroom clock. Ethan didn't move. He stared at the edge of the table, his hands clasped together so tightly that his knuckles had turned white. The judge leaned forward, waiting, while the spectators leaned in, desperate to hear the words that would end months of speculation and fear. When the foreman finally spoke, his voice was clear and firm, guilty on all counts. The sound carried through the room like a crack of thunder. For a second, there was nothing but silence. Ethan didn't blink, didn't flinch. The crowd's collective breath hung in the air, uncertain whether to gasp or stay still. Behind him, a woman sobbed quietly. The judge began to speak, his tone calm and deliberate, reciting the legal phrases that made the decision official. But no one was listening to the judge anymore. All eyes were on Ethan Rowe. At first, his expression was unreadable. Then something subtle changed in his face. His jaw twitched and his shoulders lifted slightly, as if holding in a laugh. A strange, low sound escaped his throat, quiet at first, then louder. People exchanged uneasy glances as the sound grew into laughter. It was sharp, uneven, and carried a strange rhythm that made the room feel colder. The guards took a step closer, unsure of what to do. The laughter didn't stop. It grew louder, wild, and uncontrollable until it filled every corner of the courtroom. The judge slammed his gavel, demanding order, but the command was drowned out. Ethan's laughter turned into something primal, a scream that came from deep within his chest. He stood suddenly, his chair scraping violently against the floor, and slammed his fists against the defense table. Papers flew into the air like startled birds. The guards lunged toward him, but Ethan moved faster than anyone expected. He grabbed the edge of the table and shoved it, knocking one of the guards off balance. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Someone screamed from the gallery. In the confusion, Ethan turned toward the judge's bench, his face twisted in a mixture of rage and desperation. His voice broke through the chaos, shouting words no one could fully understand. The guards caught him before he reached the bench, forcing him to the ground as he thrashed violently. His screams echoed off the wooden walls, a haunting mix of fury and pain. The courtroom descended into pandemonium. People pushed toward the exits, reporters shouted for their cameras to keep rolling, and the judge called for an immediate recess. It took 4 men to restrain Ethan. Even as they dragged him out of the room, he kept shouting, the words slurred, but one of them clear enough to be remembered. Over and over he repeated it, his voice hoarse and broken. Proof. The word echoed even after he was gone, lingering in the shocked silence that followed. When the doors finally closed behind him, the courtroom looked like a battlefield. Chairs were overturned, documents littered the floor, and the air smelled faintly of sweat and panic. The jurors sat frozen, some trembling, others staring blankly ahead, trying to process what had just happened. The judge rubbed his forehead, his face pale and stunned. No one had ever seen anything like it. Outside the courthouse, police cars crowded the parking lot. Reporters shouted questions to anyone who would listen. Inside, the walls still seemed to hum with the memory of that manic laughter. For many who had been there that day, the sound would return in their dreams, long after the verdict had faded from headlines. Ethan Rowe had come into court as a man accused of arson. He left as something entirely different, someone unpredictable, someone unrecognizable, someone who, for a brief, terrifying moment, had looked like he no longer belonged to this world. The courtroom incident spread through the news like wildfire. Every channel replayed the same footage. Ethan Rowe's laughter, his violent outburst, and the desperate struggle that ended with him being dragged away. People couldn't look away. Commentators analyzed his behavior from every angle, calling him unstable, delusional, or possibly faking insanity to avoid a life sentence. Yet beneath all the noise, one strange detail never reached the public right away. A janitor's unexpected discovery that same evening. After the courtroom had emptied, the janitor stayed late to clean up the mess left behind. Papers were scattered, chairs overturned, and the faint smell of sweat and fear still hung in the air. As he bent to pick up a few crumpled sheets near the defense table, his hand brushed against something small and hard wedged between the wooden frame and the carpet. He pulled it free and stared in confusion. It was a black USB drive, no label, no markings. It didn't seem important, but something about the way it was hidden felt deliberate. He turned it over a few times before handing it to a bailiff, who passed it to the sheriff's office the next morning. The drive was sent to the digital forensics team. It was locked with heavy encryption, which took nearly a week to crack. When the file inside finally opened, the investigators sat in stunned silence. There was only one video. It had no title, no timestamp, just a single clip. The footage began with the view of the Grayson Logistics warehouse 2 nights before the fire. The video appeared to come from a security camera that had never been logged in the official investigation. In the grainy black and white image, a figure entered the warehouse just before midnight. The person's face was hidden under a hood, and the shadows made it impossible to see details clearly. The figure carried a gas can, moving quickly and with practiced precision. They poured liquid across the floor near stacks of inventory, then struck a lighter. The flames spread instantly, reflecting off the camera lens in jagged bursts of light. The figure turned toward the camera for a moment before running out of frame. It was blurry, but one detail stood out, a metallic badge pinned to the chest of the jacket, catching a flash of light before disappearing into smoke. Investigators paused the footage, zooming in, and what they saw made their stomachs twist. The badge wasn't a company ID. It was the badge of one of Grayson's security officers, a man who had testified against Ethan during the trial. Suddenly, the word Ethan had screamed during his breakdown. Proof made sense. The evidence that could have cleared him had been right beneath his table, unnoticed until too late. The investigators quickly retraced their steps, checking the chain of custody for all surveillance data collected during the fire inquiry. They discovered something else just as troubling. Several camera feeds from the night of the fire had been accidentally erased before police could review them, all by the same person, the same security officer seen in the video. The discovery sent shockwaves through the district attorney's office. Questions began to swirl about whether the conviction had been rushed, whether someone inside the company had manipulated the investigation. The prosecution team tried to keep the findings quiet until they could verify them, but rumors spread fast. Within days, whispers of a possible cover-up reached the media. Reporters started digging, and public opinion began to shift. Some demanded a retrial. Others thought the new evidence was just another desperate trick from a guilty man. While officials debated what to do next, Ethan sat in a psychiatric unit, cut off from the outside world. He had no idea that the proof he shouted about had been found, or that the truth was starting to crawl out from beneath the ashes of the warehouse fire. Days after the shocking discovery of the hidden footage, the case of Ethan Rowe took a darker turn. The courthouse officials prepared to reopen parts of the investigation, but before any legal steps could be taken, Ethan was scheduled for transfer from the county jail to a secure psychiatric facility outside the city. The move was supposed to be routine. 2 guards were assigned to escort him in a standard white transport van. The route was direct. Only 40 minutes of driving through quiet back roads, surrounded by pine trees and farmland. Nothing about the plan seemed unusual. That morning, the van left the jail at 8:12 a.m. The guards radioed in as they passed through each checkpoint. Everything appeared normal until 8:43 when the vehicle missed its scheduled call-in. 10 minutes later, a passing motorist noticed the van parked awkwardly by the side of an empty rural road, one door hanging open. When officers arrived, they found one of the guards unconscious beside the vehicle and the other dazed but alive. Ethan Rowe was gone. The guards gave confused statements claiming they had no memory of how it happened. The cameras inside the van had been disabled, their wires neatly cut. No tire tracks led away from the scene, no sign of a struggle, and no footprints other than those of the 2 officers. It was as if Ethan had vanished into the air. The police sealed off the area, combed the woods, and brought in dogs, but there was nothing. Only one partial fingerprint was found on the door handle, Ethan's. The town erupted with speculation. Some believed he had somehow escaped, that his calm demeanor during the trial had been an act hiding careful planning. Others thought someone had helped him disappear, maybe the same people responsible for planting the evidence that convicted him. News outlets broadcast every theory they could invent, while law enforcement scrambled to control the chaos. The state declared a manhunt, helicopters swept the forests, and roadblocks appeared on every major exit. Despite all that, no trace of Ethan surfaced. A week later, the case took another unexpected twist. The security officer whose badge had been seen in the secret footage was found dead in his home. According to the report, he had taken his own life. A handwritten note was found on the kitchen table, the words barely legible. "I couldn't live with it anymore." No explanation followed, no mention of Ethan, and no confession to the fire. Investigators searched the house, but found no additional evidence. The timing of the death raised new suspicions. Some believed the officer had been silenced, others thought guilt had consumed him. Either way, his death only deepened the mystery. Officials tried to assure the public that the situation was under control, but whispers spread faster than facts. Some residents claimed to have seen a man matching Ethan's description wandering near the old railway tracks at night. Others swore they heard footsteps outside their homes, or found cigarette butts where no one had been. None of the reports led anywhere. Weeks turned into months. The case file thickened with theories, sightings, and false leads. The sheriff's task force eventually disbanded after exhausting every resource. Ethan's name faded from headlines, replaced by new stories and fresh scandals. Yet those who had witnessed his outburst in the courtroom never forgot the look in his eyes that day. Something unsteady, something that hinted he knew more than he ever said. Some believed he was still out there, hiding somewhere far from Crestwood, waiting for the world to realize what really happened the night the warehouse burned. Almost a year had passed since Ethan Rowe vanished without a trace. The story that once filled every news cycle had faded into rumor and half-remembered headlines. For most people in Crestwood, the case had become a cautionary tale, a story about a man who lost control, a courtroom explosion that symbolized guilt, madness, or both. But all that changed one quiet afternoon when a hiker exploring a remote forest near the state border stumbled upon something half buried in the dirt. It was a small, mud-covered camera with a cracked screen and a faint layer of rust on the edges. The hiker didn't think much of it at first, but when the authorities checked the memory card, they realized the device contained footage no one was prepared for. The recovered video began with shaky footage of trees swaying in the wind. The sound of crackling fire filled the background, and then a face appeared. Ethan rose. His once polished appearance was gone. His beard was thick, his cheeks hollow, his eyes tired but strangely calm. He looked older, worn down but not broken. Behind him, a small fire burned, its light flickering across the darkness of the woods. He sat cross-legged, staring straight into the lens, silent for almost a full minute before he began to speak. Ethan said he hadn't escaped from custody. Someone had let him go. He spoke carefully, pausing between each thought, as if afraid to reveal too much too fast. He claimed the fire at Grayson Logistics wasn't random. It was planned by people inside the company to erase evidence of a massive financial cover-up. He said he had stumbled upon documents proving that the company had been laundering money through fake shipping contracts for years. When he confronted a supervisor about it, he was threatened and later framed for the arson that destroyed everything. According to him, his arrest was part of the plan, a convenient way to shift blame and bury the truth permanently. He said the USB drive found under the defense table was meant to be discovered eventually, but it was only one piece of a larger puzzle. There were more recordings, more files hidden across different places, all showing how deep the corruption ran. He didn't name anyone directly, but implied that powerful figures, both in the company and within law enforcement, had a hand in covering it all up. His voice never rose above a calm tone, even when describing the night of the fire. It was the voice of a man who had stopped expecting to be believed. As the flames behind him burned lower, Ethan reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small metal badge, the same one seen in the warehouse footage. He turned it in his hand, the firelight glinting off the surface, and said softly that this was the symbol of betrayal, proof of the man who had done their bidding. He placed it on a rock beside the fire, then leaned closer to the camera. His face filled the frame, eyes dark and hollow, and he whispered something too faint to catch. A moment later, The screen went black. When investigators enhanced the audio, the final words were barely audible but chilling. Ethan had whispered, "You convicted the wrong man." That was the last trace of him anyone ever found. Despite extensive searches of the forest, there was no sign of a campsite, no footprints, and no remains. The area looked untouched, as if no one had been there in years. The camera was the only evidence that he had ever existed beyond the courthouse walls. The video reignited national interest, sparking debates, documentaries, and endless theories. Some believed he had exposed the truth and gone into hiding. Others insisted the video was faked. Whatever the case, Ethan Rowe's story ended not in a courtroom or a prison cell, but in the flickering light of a fire deep in the woods, with a final whisper that left more questions than answers.